Steffi Graf stood frozen, and 50,000 people forgot how to breathe. The Berlin crowd didn't cheer, they didn't clap, they erupted because what just happened in front of them had never in the entire history of this tournament happened before. A 19-year-old girl from Manila standing on the most historically loaded tennis court in all of Europe leaned toward a German ball kid during a routine changeover and spoke. Not in English, not in Spanish, not in Filipino, in German. Fluent, confident, warm. And the stadium? It lost its mind. Phones flew into the air. Strangers grabbed each other's arms. A woman in the front row pressed both hands against her mouth like she'd just witnessed something sacred, because in a sport that has always rewarded sameness, same countries, same academies, same faces at the top, something genuinely revolutionary had just unfolded between a teenager and a ball kid during a 30-second break. Steffi Graf, the greatest German tennis player who ever lived, the woman whose name is carved into the DNA of the sport, stood completely, utterly, breathlessly still. And that stillness said everything words never could. This is the story of a single moment that redefined belonging, a moment that the highlights will never fully capture, a moment that made even legends stop and stare. Stay with this until the very end, because what Alex Eala did that day in Berlin goes so much deeper than a language. It goes to the very heart of what this sport has always refused to discuss. There is a version of this story that never happens. In that version, Alexandra Eala grows up in the Philippines, plays tennis recreationally at a local club, gets good, maybe even exceptional, and then quietly fades into a world that simply wasn't built to notice her. A world where funding goes elsewhere, where visas become obstacles, where scouts look past Southeast Asian girls because the system has trained their eyes to look elsewhere. That version is the one the tennis establishment expected. This is not that version. Alex Eala was born in Manila in 2005 into a family that recognized something electric in her before she could even articulate it herself. Her father, Michael, a former professional tennis player himself, watched his daughter move on a court and understood immediately. This wasn't recreational talent. This was something that demanded sacrifice, investment, and a level of belief that most families couldn't sustain across an ocean. So, they made the call that changed everything. They sent her to Spain. Specifically to the Rafa Nadal Academy in Manacor, one of the most prestigious, demanding, and selective tennis development programs on the entire planet. A place where only the genuinely gifted survive, where 12-hour training schedules are considered standard, where teenage homesickness is treated as a personal obstacle rather than an institutional concern. Eala didn't just survive there, she thrived. She won the Junior Australian Open in 2022. She captured the Junior US Open in the same calendar year, becoming the first Filipino to win a Grand Slam title at any level, junior or senior. And she did it without fanfare, without a major sponsor attached to her name at the time, without the institutional machinery that launches most young players into international consciousness. But here is the detail that almost nobody discusses when they celebrate her titles, the part that makes the Berlin moment not just surprising, but inevitable in retrospect. During those formative years in Manacor, surrounded by Spanish coaches, European training partners, and an academy culture that operated across multiple languages, Eala absorbed something far beyond footwork and forehand mechanics. She absorbed Europe itself. She learned to navigate multilingual environments with ease. She traveled to German-speaking tournaments during her junior development years. She spent extended periods in environments where German wasn't a party trick, it was simply the language of the people around her. So, while the world watched her win junior Grand Slams and assumed her story was about athletic brilliance alone, something else was quietly assembling beneath the surface. A young woman was learning how to walk into any room in the world and make it feel like home. By the time she arrived in Berlin for the tournament that would produce the most talked about non-tennis moment in recent women's tennis memory, Eala wasn't a visitor. She wasn't a curiosity. She wasn't the exotic underdog the European crowds were prepared to politely applaud before watching her exit early. She was a professional, a ranked player, a competitor who had already demonstrated at Grand Slam level that she belonged in the conversation about the sport's next generation. Berlin simply didn't know it yet. And then came the changeover. Still with us? Because what happened next in those 30 seconds is the part that stopped Steffi Graf cold. Don't go anywhere. Understand this. A changeover in professional tennis is designed to be forgettable. It is 90 seconds of functional necessity. Players sit, towel off, hydrate, breathe. Ball kids move efficiently in the background, almost invisible by design, trained to occupy space without drawing attention. The crowd murmurs, shifts in seats, checks phones. Nothing happens during a changeover. That is the entire institutional point. Except on this particular afternoon in Berlin, something happened that the tournament organizers hadn't scheduled, that the broadcast team hadn't anticipated, and that would be replayed across social media platforms within minutes of occurring. Eala was sitting courtside, mid-match, somewhere in the second set of a fiercely contested encounter. The Berlin crowd had been warm throughout, appreciative, engaged, but not yet ignited. They were watching a talented young Filipina compete with skill and composure, certainly, but the atmosphere hadn't shifted into something extraordinary yet. Then, a young German ball kid, a teenager, maybe 14 or 15 years old, approached Eala's end of the court to retrieve a towel, a standard, invisible interaction in any other match on any other day. Eala looked up, and instead of the nod, the half-smile, the silent transactional acknowledgement that players typically offer ball kids, she spoke in German. Warm, colloquial, completely natural German, not textbook phrases delivered with tourist-level confidence, but genuine conversational language, the kind you only develop through actual immersion. Witnesses in the front rows heard fragments of the exchange. The ball kid's face transformed instantly, shock dissolving into absolute delight, a grin spreading wide enough to be visible from the upper tiers. And then the front rows heard it, and then the middle sections heard it, and then the entire stadium understood what had just occurred. The applause didn't build gradually, it detonated, a sudden, overwhelming collective sound that had nothing to do with a winner being struck or a match being decided. It was the sound of an entire crowd falling in love with someone in real time. Eala seemed genuinely surprised by the reaction. She glanced around the stadium with an expression caught perfectly between amusement and humility, as if she hadn't calculated the effect, as if this had simply been the natural thing to do in that moment, as if speaking German to a German teenager on German soil required no explanation whatsoever. That authenticity is precisely what shattered the crowd completely, because here is what the Berlin audience understood instinctively, even before they could articulate it. This wasn't performance. This wasn't calculated charm deployed by a media-trained athlete for strategic likability. This was a young woman from the Philippines, raised partially in Spain, competing in Germany, who had quietly taken the time, somewhere in the years of training and traveling and competing, to learn the language of the country she was visiting. Not because anyone required it, not because it helped her game, but because she wanted to connect. And somewhere in the stands, in the area reserved for tournament dignitaries and former champions, one particular person processed all of this with an expression that the cameras fortunately captured in extraordinary detail. Steffi Graf did not move. Frozen, completely frozen. And what was behind that expression? That's where the story gets genuinely extraordinary. Keep watching. Before we decode Steffi's expression, understand the scale of what ignited around her in those immediate seconds. Berlin crowds are not passive. German tennis audiences carry within them a particular pride, a historical relationship with the sport shaped significantly by Graf herself, by the Becker era, by decades of watching their nation produce champions who represented something disciplined and formidable about German identity. But German crowds are also, when genuinely moved, capable of producing an emotional volume that transforms an athletic venue into something resembling a concert, a church, a communal exhale of feeling that everybody present will describe differently, but nobody will ever forget. That is what IGA triggered in 30 seconds. Phones materialized across the stadium simultaneously, not to check notifications or capture match statistics, but to record. Strangers nudged strangers. The murmur of realization spread in concentric rings from the courtside rows outward toward the upper tiers, each new section understanding a moment later, each erupting a beat behind the previous one. Within 4 minutes of the changeover ending and play resuming, the clip was already circulating, not on official tournament channels, those were still broadcasting the match, on personal accounts, on fan pages, on the kind of informal digital infrastructure that modern sports culture has developed specifically to handle moments the broadcast misses. Hashtag IGA German began trending in Germany within the hour. Filipino fan communities, already among the most passionate and organized supporter groups in contemporary women's tennis, amplified the clip globally within 90 minutes. The numbers climbed with a specific velocity reserved for content that doesn't require explanation. Moments so immediately comprehensible, so viscerally affecting, that algorithmic barriers simply dissolve around them. Comments poured in across multiple languages. German fans expressed disbelief, mixed with profound appreciation. Filipino supporters wrote paragraphs about national pride, about what it means to watch one of their own move so naturally through a world historically close to them. Tennis purists who normally resist anything that diverts attention from the athletic competition found themselves sharing the clip regardless. She didn't have to do that. One comment read, capturing something essential. She absolutely didn't have to do that. And that, precisely, was the point. The most powerful gestures in human interaction are always the unnecessary ones, the ones that cost nothing logistically, but reveal everything characterologically. IGA could have sat in silence during that changeover. She could have offered a polite nod. She could have done what virtually every other professional tennis player on tour would have done, treated the ball kid as a functional backdrop to her own athletic focus. Instead, she looked at a teenager doing an invisible job in a foreign language and chose to meet her there, in her language, on her terms. Berlin didn't erupt because of nationalism or novelty or the spectacle of a Filipino person speaking German. Berlin erupted because the crowd witnessed something genuinely rare in professional sport. An unguarded, unperformed moment of human connection that had absolutely nothing to do with winning. And Steffi Graf, who spent 15 years at the absolute summit of the sport, who built a legacy on precision and dominance and legendary composure, processed all of it without moving a single muscle. That expression on Steffi's face, what was it really? Because what she was feeling in that moment reaches back decades, and it changes how you understand this entire story. IGA didn't plan to make history during that changeover. She didn't arrive in Berlin with a strategy to win the crowd, impress the legends, or generate a viral moment that would circulate across every tennis community globally within hours. She simply saw a person who deserved acknowledgement and offered it in that person's own language, with warmth, without hesitation. And 50,000 people understood simultaneously that they had witnessed something the sport rarely produces and cannot manufacture, a completely genuine, completely human moment of connection that transcended nationality, ranking, and the relentless competitive machinery of professional tennis. Steffi Graf's stillness was the tribute. The crowd's eruption was the verdict. And IGA's quiet smile afterward, slightly surprised, entirely genuine, was the signature of someone who hadn't realized they just changed a room forever. The question this moment leaves behind isn't whether IGA will go on to win Grand Slams, achieve #1 rankings, or collect the trophies that would place her formally among the sport's greatest achievers. The question is this: in a sport that has always been better at rewarding excellence than celebrating humanity, what happens when someone arrives who refuses to separate the two? Drop your answer below, because this conversation is only just beginning. If this story moved you, if you believe women's tennis deserves more moments like this, and more storytelling that goes beneath the scoreline, subscribe right now. Every week we bring you the stories the highlights forget, the emotions the broadcasts skip, the humans behind the champions. Subscribe, because tennis has never been just about tennis.